Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. So I've been asked to speak briefly about my experiences translating book 26 of Al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. This is the book Kitab Dunya, or the Censure of this world, condemnation of this world. In general, I found this exercise to be extremely beneficial to me personally, intellectually stimulating, and I just wanted to share some of the findings that I came out with in the end. So Al-Ghazali in this book is speaking generally about the theme of zuhd, or self-denial. Sometimes it's translated as asceticism. He rarely uses that word itself, but if you look at the basic content, that is what he's talking about. And he's talking about here, obviously, is renunciation of this world, a dunya, which is translated consistently as this world throughout the book. So the dunya, a dunya, it comes from the word danu, which is lower, or the lowest world, lowest in the sense of sort of in terms of the hierarchy of worlds. Also the world that is nearest at hand. That's probably one very simple way of translating it. He does not mean al-ard, or the earth. What he's talking about, generally speaking, is alam shahada, what is seen, the world, the realm of what is seen. And specifically, though, he's talking about how we engage that world, how we engage the material world, which determines whether our use of it is part of this world or part of the hereafter, al-akhirah. So everything done for the sake of the hereafter is part of the hereafter. So he's basically talking about everything else in this case. The book, and I'll go more into some of these theories. The book itself is an introduction plus 4 subsections. The first subsection is the longest one, and it constitutes the main primary sources that Al-Ghazali forms into a compilation. And these are primary source texts that warn about the dangers of this world, define what this world is, and talk about how some people fall into this world, examples of how people fall into this world. Obviously, he takes from the Quran and the Hadith literature, but he also takes a lot of reports from the earliest generations, and early pious figures within this context. The second subsection constitutes 14 metaphors or analogies for this world to illustrate its nature and to illustrate its dangers. There's some of these he takes from his primary sources, others he comes up with on his own, as far as I know. About 6 of these, almost half of them, make use one way or another of the metaphor of water. Some of them have to do with the nature of water when one's trekking through it, how it clings to one's clothes. Others have to do with the nature of water, how one is trying to get across it, and so on. The third subsection has to do with the main theory of the book. This is where Al-Ghazali kind of comes up with what constitutes this world, what defines this world, why is it something that should be condemned, and what is the point of renouncing it. It's not just renunciation for the sake of renunciation, but rather there should be some larger point to all of this. Finally, the fourth subsection is an original historical/sociological narrative to explain the emergence of all worldly occupations and human vocations, and how these lead one away from the larger picture of this world, of understanding the true nature of this world, and in the end, how they lead one away from God. So I just wanted to go over some of the main theories of Section 3. Essentially, I found, obviously, Sections 2, 3, and 4 to be the most original, as they are. I found them very stimulating, and I derived a lot from them. So Section 3, he defines worldliness by its definition as anything that constitutes enjoyment of a luxury, a tana'um. It doesn't matter if one has ownership of a worldly thing, or if one does not have ownership of a worldly thing. Ownership is barely considered. What it is if one's indulging it. So I might indulge in a worldly enjoyment, food, clothing, etc., but I don't necessarily have to have ownership of it in the first place. So to explain why enjoyment of this world, or enjoying luxury in this world is problematic, he starts with the idea that there are 5 things that remain with the human being after death. These are knowledge of God, righteous acts, a purified heart, intimacy with God's remembrance, and in the end, love of God. So any aspect, any engagement with this world with the intention, at the minimal level, I should say, any engagement with this world at the minimal level with the intention of achieving one of these 5 things, that does not constitute this world. In fact, that is part of the hereafter. That is part of the al-akhirah. Anything more than the bare essential, but the bare necessities, or anything not done with one of these 5 things in mind, that constitutes indulgence, self-indulgence, and a tana'um, or enjoying luxury in this world. From there, this leads then into the 4th subsection of the book, which, like I said, is a historical / sociological narrative that explains how the 3 essential needs of the human being for food, clothing, and shelter, how these give rise to all human vocations and trades. And like I said, I found this to be particularly interesting. So from these 3 essential needs to survive, these produce the 5 fundamental human occupations, which are farming, herding, foraging, weaving, and construction. Now, there are some corollary trades as well that go along with these, but these are the 5 fundamental things. Then there are the secondary trades that exist to provide security so that these 5 fundamental trades can exist. So here we're talking specifically that to meet these security needs, we need soldiers or military personnel. These in turn require tax administrators and collectors in order to transfer wealth from other people to these security personnel. And finally, this whole larger system requires administration and political leadership at the top of the hierarchy. The point here, so Al-Ghazali goes into quite some depth on how these trades came about, leading from the 3 fundamental human needs to the 5 fundamental occupations. And he says the complexity of this system leaves people confused about the true purpose of life, why we are in existence in this world. So the whole system is rather confusing, and this confusion leads people away from the larger purpose. So from this, he goes into examples of how people get confused by the system and lead into worldliness. He also gets into the opposite, how people renounce the world, but do so to such an extreme that they actually also fall into problematic territory. He doesn't provide a lot of practical examples of how to balance between these 2 extremes. And for that reason, I come to the conclusion that, like a lot of books in the Ihya, this book is intended as a corrective to kind of slap the reader out of their sense of complacency and get them into the right attitude towards this world and correct their action based upon supplementary readings that they'll have to do at that point. The book's not necessarily intended to provide practical advice on how to engage the world correctly. It's intended to motivate the person to try and seek out sources that could explain that. So it's intended, like I said, as a corrective in that sense. So that's just some major points I derived from the book. I would highly recommend reading it. I think the translation is approachable. You can engage it in any number of ways. So yes, Al-Ghazali intended the book for a very specific readership, but I think a lot of readers of different levels could engage the text practically. It could be something at a more personal level. It could be something at a more intellectual or historical level. I think the book has a lot of value for many different readerships, and in that regard, I took a lot of value myself in it. So thank you for listening to me, and I wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.